My name is Trish Cooper. I'm 32 years old, and the moment that shattered whatever was left of my relationship with my family happened on a warm Saturday afternoon that should have been harmless, even joyful. We were all gathered in my parents' living room. My mother, father, my older sister Megan, her husband, and their two toddlers who were running around with sticky fingers and loud giggles. The TV was on low, the ceiling fan hummed, and I was doing what I always did, trying to blend into the walls so I wouldn't annoy anyone. Then my mom, with her voice a little too casual, a little too amused, said the words that cracked something inside me for good. Trish just takes up space. She didn't even whisper it. She said it lightly like it was a joke everyone already knew, and they all laughed. My father chuckled behind the newspaper he barely looked up from. Megan laughed the hardest, like she'd been waiting for someone to say it out loud. Even my brother-in-law smirked awkwardly. Everyone laughed, except me. I was sitting at the edge of the couch, a plate of food on my lap that suddenly felt too heavy, too embarrassing, like even my meal was an inconvenience. Something inside my chest tightened so fast, it knocked the breath out of me. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I didn't defend myself. I simply froze, like I'd become the furniture she accused me of being. Then, still trembling, I whispered the quietest sentence I've ever said in my life. I don't want to be here anymore. No one heard me, or maybe they didn't care enough to pause the laughter. But I stood up, walked out the front door, and 3 months later, I was 5,000 miles away, sitting in a tiny apartment in Lisbon, Portugal, building a new life from scratch. A new table, a new version of me. A life where I wasn't treated like air, unless someone needed something. Before I take you into the journey that led me across the ocean, if you're listening to this right now, I need you to stay with me. Because this story isn't just about leaving home. It's about how the people closest to you can make you feel invisible, and how the pain of that invisibility can spark the courage to finally choose yourself. If you've ever felt unheard, unseen, or unimportant in your own family, this story might hit deep. And if it does, then I'm telling it for you too. Now, let me take you back to where it really started. My mother's comment didn't come from nowhere. It was a symptom of years of subtle jabs she delivered with a smile so polite that anyone outside the family would swear she was the sweetest woman in the world. Growing up in our small Ohio town, Megan had always been the golden child, the one with the perfect smile, the perfect grades, the perfect hair that curled exactly the way my mother's did when she was younger. I, on the other hand, was the quiet one, the girl who preferred sketching by the window to going to school dances, the girl who forgot to speak up at dinner because the conversations moved too fast and too loud, the girl who always felt like she was apologizing for existing. And somehow, that became my identity in my family. My mother rarely said anything outright hurtful. That wasn't her style. Instead, her comments came wrapped in compliments that pricked like needles. Trish, you're so sensitive, honey. You really feel things too much. Sweetheart, you're so quiet. People can forget you're in the room. You're so emotional. You need too much. You overwhelm easily. Years of that settles into your bones. You start believing the stories someone else wrote about you, that you're the burden, that you're the one who has to shrink so others can breathe, that if someone gets upset, it must be because of you. And Megan learned to weaponize that weakness early. She loved being the center of attention, and she hated how easily I melted into the background because it made her shine even brighter by comparison. She teased me, little things at first. Why are you so weird, Trish? You're so dramatic. You're too much and somehow not enough at the same time. They all said these things like facts, like characteristics written into my DNA, and I accepted it. Because what else do you do when your whole family agrees on who you are? But that day in the living room, when my mother said I'd take up space, it felt different, sharper, more deliberate, like she was labeling me in front of everyone, as though I needed to be reminded of my place. And the craziest part? They didn't even mean harm. That's what broke me. They didn't see me enough to realize how much it would hurt. To them, I was the harmless, overly emotional daughter who could be teased and dismissed without consequence. The one who would always stay. The one who would always take the role they assigned me. But the truth was something they hadn't noticed. I had been quietly breaking for years. That afternoon, after they laughed, I had an out-of-body moment. I sat there watching them live comfortably inside a world where I didn't matter. And for the first time in my life, I thought, if I disappeared, they would only notice the chores I used to do. That thought terrified me, not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. So when I left the house that day, I didn't slam the door or shout. I simply walked away like a ghost, finally realizing she didn't have to haunt people who didn't want her. I drove around town for hours, parking in random lots just to breathe. My hands shook on the steering wheel, and I kept asking myself, why now? Why did those words hurt more than everything else they've said before? But I knew why. It was because I was finally tired. Tired of being the family's emotional doormat. Tired of shrinking myself to make them comfortable. Tired of being told who I was instead of discovering it for myself. That night, I didn't go home. I stayed at a small hotel on the edge of town, scrolling aimlessly on my phone, until I stumbled on a picture someone posted of a cafe in Lisbon. Sunlight pouring into a white room, wooden tables, people writing in journals. Something inside me whispered, what if you could breathe somewhere like that? And for the first time in my life, I wanted something for myself. Not for my family, not for approval, not for peacekeeping, just for me. Over the next few days, I told no one where I was. I ignored my mother's text that said, where are you? Did you take the leftover lasagna? As if her missing food was more important than her missing daughter. I ignored Megan's messages. Mom's freaking out because of you. Stop being dramatic. I ignored my father's single, emotionless call home. Instead, I went to the library. I sat at a table with my laptop open and searched for plane tickets, visas, short-term rentals, anything to get me far away. My heart raced the entire time like I was committing a crime, but I kept going. I didn't know why Portugal popped into my mind, but maybe it was because the picture felt like peace, like the opposite of everything I'd ever known. By the fourth day, I booked a ticket that drained most of my savings. And 15 days later, I was gone. But before I left the country, something happened that nearly made me stay. Something that still sends shivers down my spine when I think about it, because it revealed a truth I never expected. On the night before my flight, my sister Megan showed up at the motel where I was staying. I wasn't surprised she found me. She had always been the family's bloodhound when she wanted something. She knocked once, loud enough to make me jump, and when I opened the door, she pushed past me like she owned the place. Her eyes were red, but not from crying, more like anger mixed with exhaustion. She dropped into the chair by the window and said something I will never forget. Don't leave. You can't leave. Mom needs you. Not we need you. Not I'm sorry. Not we were wrong. Just Mom needs you. And what she said next froze me in place. Not because it was emotional, but because it revealed her true motive. If you leave, everything falls on me. The errands, the kids, the family dinners. You know Mom relies on you for things she doesn't want to do. My heart sank. Not because she said it, but because for the first time I realized I wasn't staying for love. I was staying out of obligation, out of guilt, out of conditioning, and they all knew it. Right there, Megan leaned forward, her voice sharper now, and said, "You owe us, Trish. You owe Mom. You can't just disappear. Who do you think you are?" Who do I think I am? A question I had never asked myself until that moment. A question that, surprisingly, didn't scare me. I took a deep breath, looked her in the eyes, and whispered, "Someone who deserves to exist." Her face twisted like the sentence personally offended her. Before she could respond, my phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at the screen and saw a message from my mother that made my stomach drop. A message that revealed everything: her motives, her true thoughts about me, and the part she played in keeping me small. It was a message she clearly meant to send to Megan, but accidentally sent it to me instead. And when I opened it, my entire childhood suddenly made sense. I stared at my phone, my hand trembling as if it had a life of its own. The message from my mother glared at me on the screen like a spotlight in the dark. It wasn't meant for me. That much was obvious. It began with the tiny emoji of a wine glass, then the words, "Megan, she's so fragile and slow, always in her own little world. I swear, sometimes I wonder why we even bother. She'll never be like us. Don't let her ruin the day. She can take up space all she wants elsewhere, but not here." My chest tightened so violently I thought I might collapse. I read it again and again. Every word was a punch, every sentence a reminder of years of subtle, simmering contempt I had tried to ignore. The truth hit me harder than Megan's manipulation, harder than my mother's offhand comment in the living room. I had been expendable, unseen, and it had been intentional all along. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. My own mother had been feeding Megan the narrative of my inadequacy for years. That laughter, that smile in the living room, it had never been innocent. It had been carefully orchestrated theater, and I was the unwilling prop. All those times I had felt invisible, all those moments of self-doubt, they weren't accidents. They were deliberate. And now, at 32, I was finally awake enough to see it. My vision blurred with tears, but for the first time, the anger that usually followed my sadness didn't just burn, it galvanized me. I realized something crucial. Their amusement, their concern, their manipulation, it all had one goal: keeping me small, keeping me compliant, keeping me in their orbit like a satellite that could orbit but never rise. That night, after Megan left, I sat on the motel bed staring out at the dimly lit street below. I thought about my childhood, the countless times I had tried to speak up and been shut down, the times I had celebrated achievements only to have them dismissed or overshadowed by Megan's accomplishments. I remembered my high school art exhibit, where I had stayed up nights perfecting a painting that eventually earned a minor award. Megan, of course, had gotten the attention from the teachers, the photographers, even my parents, while mine was barely glanced at. I remembered birthday parties, where my carefully wrapped gifts were cute, but Megan's were thoughtful or perfectly chosen. And the vacations. God, the vacations. Every family trip, I was the background extra in their photo albums, the ones silently holding the bag or trying not to step into the frame, because stepping into it meant drawing attention. The weight of it all pressed down on me, heavier than my suitcase by the door. That was when I realized that running away wasn't just about distance. It wasn't about Portugal or new scenery or escaping for a few months. It was about reclaiming myself, about creating a space where I could exist fully without their judgments hovering over me. That was why, the next morning, I booked the flight, and this time there were no second thoughts. I wasn't leaving to hide. I was leaving to claim a piece of life that was mine alone. Landing in Lisbon felt like stepping into a painting. The sun slanted through the narrow streets, hitting the cobblestones in gold, the aroma of fresh bread and roasted coffee mingling in the air. I had a small apartment rented for 3 months, nothing fancy, just enough space for me to breathe. But as I unpacked my few belongings, I realized something. I had never owned my own space before. Every bedroom, every living room I had ever occupied had been shared, shaped, and dictated by my family. Even the walls in my childhood room seemed to whisper Megan's laughter and Mom's offhand criticisms. Here, there were no whispers, no judgments, no expectations, just walls and light and air and me. But loneliness followed me like a shadow. The nights were the hardest. I would lie awake in a foreign city, listening to the hum of the street outside and remember the sound of Megan and her children laughing, Mom's laughter, Dad's sighs of, "She's fine, let her be." And I felt the sting of missing them, the weird contradiction of wanting to be seen, but not by them. I had expected relief. Instead, I got the sharp pang of grief. The grief of realizing that family, your own blood, could be so blind to who you were, or worse, so deliberate in ignoring it. A week into my new life, I decided to wander the streets of Lisbon with a notebook and a small camera I had bought online. I needed something tangible, something I could touch, as a reminder that I could make, create, and hold on to things that were mine. That's when I stumbled upon a tiny workshop tucked in an alley. The sign above the door read, "Móveis artesanales," handcrafted furniture. Inside, the smell of sawdust and linseed oil enveloped me. Old wooden tables, chairs, and benches lined the walls, each one unique, each one telling a story. And that's when it hit me. I could build something, not just for survival, not just for decoration, but as a declaration. Something I could touch, something that was mine entirely. I could build a table, a sturdy, unmovable table symbolizing the ground I would stand on in life. And I did. The first few days were clumsy. I had never really worked with wood before. My hands blistered. The saw was terrifying at first. And every time a piece didn't fit right, I thought about my family, about their neat, perfect lives and how they had shaped mine to be small, cautious, quiet. Every mistake with the wood felt like all the mistakes I had made trying to exist in a world that didn't want me to. But then a piece would fit. A joint would lock perfectly, and in that moment, the sense of accomplishment, of mastery over something real, was intoxicating. Each nail, each brushstroke of varnish became a metaphor. I wasn't just building furniture, I was building myself. But just as the rhythm of sawdust and wood brought a quiet satisfaction, a shadow from home intruded. On the 10th day, I received an email. Not from Mom, not from Megan, but from a cousin I barely spoke to. It was a long chain of forwarded messages, screenshots of texts between Megan and Mom, discussing my whereabouts, my finances, and even attempting to guilt me into returning. But what cut the deepest wasn't the manipulation itself, it was the casual way they had tried to erase me. One message read, "Trish will regret this. She always does. She can't survive without us." Another said, "Just wait till she's alone and realizes what she's giving up." I should have been crushed. I should have curled into the bed and cried. But instead, something inside me shifted. I read each line and realized how desperately they had tried to control me. Not out of love, not out of concern, but because control made them comfortable. And it was in that moment I understood the final betrayal. I had been forced to grow up alone emotionally, even while living in a family. I had been navigating life with invisible chains on my mind, learning early how to adapt, how to survive silently. And now, miles away, I finally had the power to break them. The next weeks became a rhythm of creation and healing. The table I was building in the workshop grew stronger and sturdier with each day, reflecting a confidence I hadn't allowed myself to feel in decades. Neighbors, fellow artisans, and even tourists passing by would comment on the precision and uniqueness of my work, and each compliment was a small, sharp reminder that recognition didn't have to come from my family to matter. It could come from life itself, from strangers, from myself. But life, of course, doesn't let you heal in peace. About a month into my Lisbon chapter, I received a package at my apartment. No return address. Inside was a folded letter written in my mother's precise, delicate handwriting. The first sentence made my heart stop. "Trish, we miss you more than you know. Come home before it's too late." I laughed bitterly at first. Then I read the second paragraph. The words weren't just about missing me. They were about control. "You think you can just run to Europe and start a life? You're not ready. You don't understand the responsibilities you've left behind. Megan and I cannot handle the burden alone." That's when I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. The distance had changed nothing for them. They had not loved me differently. They had only loved me insofar as I served them. And the painful truth hit me harder than the initial insult from the living room. They had never wanted me to thrive. They had only wanted me to exist within a specific boundary that I had crossed the moment I bought my plane ticket. That night, as the rain tapped against the window of my small Lisbon apartment, I sat on the edge of my unmade bed, the half-finished table looming in the corner. I touched the smooth, sanded wood with my hands, now rough and calloused from labor, and I made a silent vow to myself. I will finish this table. I will finish it because I deserve to build something that is mine, something unmovable, something permanent, something that no one can ever dismiss as taking up space. And then, just as I was about to turn off the light, I heard a knock at my apartment door. My heart jumped. Nobody knew I was here. Nobody could have found me. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to hide, to pretend, to remain invisible. But another thought passed through my mind, fierce and unyielding. I was not invisible anymore. I walked to the door, hesitating for only a moment, and peeked through the peephole. Outside, standing in the dim light of the hallway, was a figure I had never expected to see in Lisbon.
I froze, my hand hovering over the doorknob. The figure outside my door was unmistakable, yet entirely impossible. Standing there in the dim hallway light, framed by the tiny lobby window behind them, was Megan. My chest constricted so tightly it was hard to breathe. How had she found me here? I had changed my address, blocked all family numbers except the ones I knew were safe, and had been careful, obsessively careful, not to leave a trail. Yet here she was, smirking just enough to show she had the upper hand, as if finding me in Lisbon was just another trophy for her to hold. I opened the door a crack, letting only a sliver of light escape from my apartment, and said cautiously, "Megan, what are you doing here?" Her eyes flickered, almost predatory, and she stepped inside before I could react. "Trish," she said softly, almost sweetly. "I had to see for myself. You've been running, hiding, pretending like you're independent, but we all know that's not true. You can't do this alone." Her words were honeyed, but the venom underneath was obvious. She wasn't worried about me. She was worried about control, about maintaining the narrative she and Mom had built for years. I stepped back, pressing my hand against the doorframe to create distance. "I am alone, Megan, and I'm finally okay with it." My voice trembled, not with fear, but with the shock of realizing how different I felt being firm for the first time in my life. I didn't want her to see the shaking, so I straightened my shoulders and tried to speak clearly. "I came here to create something for myself, not for anyone else. I'm not asking for permission, and I'm not going back." She laughed softly, almost mockingly. "You think this is about you, Lisbon, some furniture project?" Her tone sharpened. "It's about us. Mom's worried, Dad's worried, and I'm frustrated because you're leaving us with everything. Your responsibilities, your space." The word cut me to the core, because now I realized she had rehearsed this entire encounter. She had convinced herself that I owed them, that my existence was somehow contingent on their approval. And yet, beneath the surface, I noticed something else. A flicker of fear. Just for a moment, her confidence faltered. I recognized it instantly. the fear of losing control. That small crack in her facade made my blood boil with both satisfaction and sadness. Years of manipulation, and it all rested on fragile nerves and whispered lies. I shut the door fully behind her, holding the chain lock just in case, and said cautiously, "You know what the truth is, Megan? You've been trying to manipulate me for years. Mom's messages, your jabs, your laughs. It wasn't love. It was control. And now I choose myself. That table in the workshop, these days I'm spending figuring out who I really am, none of it is for you, none of it is for Mom, and none of it is for anyone who tried to shrink me. I'm done being small." Her expression shifted, first surprise, then something that looked almost like rage, and finally a twisted sort of amusement. "So this is what it's come to, Trish," she said, pacing my tiny living room, her hands clenched into fists, then loosening. "You're trying to pretend you're strong. You think being far away in some foreign city makes you, I don't know, empowered?" I watched her pacing, and a strange sense of clarity settled over me. For the first time, I wasn't afraid. I understood her now. Megan had never been threatened by me as a person. She had been threatened by the idea that I could exist freely outside her shadow, that my happiness didn't need her permission. And that realization gave me the courage to speak a truth I had whispered to myself only until now. "You're right," I said calmly, my eyes locking on hers. "I am strong. I'm finally strong enough to stop hiding from the world you and Mom tried to control me with. I don't need your validation, I don't need your approval, and I certainly don't need you to dictate the way I exist." Her face contorted, a mixture of disbelief and fury, and then, unexpectedly, she smirked. "So this is what it's come to, Trish. That table you're building, this life you're cobbling together, it's going to last? You'll get lonely. You'll miss your family. You'll regret running." I shook my head, feeling a strange surge of power in my chest. Lonely? Maybe. But loneliness is better than being invisible in the people who are supposed to love me. Missing my family? I do, sometimes. But not the toxicity that came with them. And regret? I only regret not realizing sooner that I deserved to exist fully, on my own terms. She stopped pacing and stared at me, silence filling the room. Then she laughed again, softer this time, almost pitying. "So this is what it's come to? You think you can just erase the years, the memories, the family dynamics, and come out unscathed?" I felt my throat tighten, but I didn't back down. "I'm not erasing anything. I'm learning from it. Every insult, every manipulation, every laugh at my expense, I carry it with me, but it won't define me anymore. I'll build myself up, literally and figuratively. That table in the workshop, that's just the start. And unlike the people I grew up with, it won't break under me, and neither will I." Her ears narrowed, and she said quietly, almost like a threat, "You think you're done with us? You think distance changes anything? You can run, Trish, but you can't escape your past." I took a deep breath and smiled, genuinely this time. "Maybe, but I don't have to run anymore. I just have to keep moving forward, and that's exactly what I'm doing." She paused, as if weighing her next move. Then, surprisingly, she left. Not with a slam, not with a dramatic accusation, but with the soft, almost resigned, "We'll see, Trish." And the door clicked shut behind her. For the first time in my life, I felt relief. And yet, the encounter left me shaken. Megan had shown up in Lisbon. She had found me. If she could do that, what else were they capable of? How far would they go to manipulate me, to pull me back into the roles I had finally escaped? And deep down, I knew the answer wasn't comforting. They would try anything to keep me small. The following days were a mix of fear and resolve. Every time I left the apartment, I felt her presence looming, even though she wasn't physically there. I began noticing subtle things.
A stranger in the cafe who lingered a little too long, a car parked nearby for hours, a shadow in the alley as I walked home. Whether it was paranoia or reality, it didn't matter. The fear reminded me that freedom isn't free. It has to be fought for, even in a city as beautiful and welcoming as Lisbon. And yet, amid this tension, something miraculous happened. In the workshop, my table began to take shape in ways I hadn't imagined. I designed a feature I hadn't intended at first, a hidden drawer, just big enough for letters, keepsakes, or whatever I wanted to hide and protect. As I worked on it, I realized the symbolism wasn't lost on me. This table wasn't just furniture. It was a statement, a declaration of boundaries, of self-worth, of protection. Every cut I made, every nail I hammered, every coat of varnish I applied was a step away from the family that had tried to diminish me. And then, one evening as the sun dipped low over the terracotta rooftops of Lisbon, I received a call from an unknown number. My heart leapt into my throat. I hesitated, but answered. The voice on the other end was calm, almost gentle, but carried a weight I couldn't ignore. "Trish Cooper?" the voice asked. "Yes," I replied cautiously. "I'm someone who knows the truth about your family, about what they've done, about what they're planning next. You need to listen carefully." And just like that, my world shifted again. I thought I had escaped, thought I had taken the first step toward freedom. But the truth, bigger, darker, more manipulative than anything I had imagined, was waiting for me. And it was closer than I ever feared. The voice on the other end of the phone was low, urgent, almost conspiratorial. "Trish, you need to know. Your mother and Megan, they've been spreading lies about you. Not just small ones, but serious ones. They're trying to ruin you back home. And if you stay silent, it'll get worse." I felt the blood drain from my face. Every instinct screamed at me to hang up, to push this away. But curiosity and a flicker of dread kept me on the line. "Who are you?" I asked cautiously, my voice barely above a whisper. "Call me someone who's been watching out for you from the shadows. I've seen what they've done to you for years, and I can't let it continue. You need to come back prepared, or stay gone, but on your own terms. They're not just holding grudges. They're planning to manipulate everyone around you, friends, family, even work contacts, to get you back under their control." My hands shook. All the fears I had tried to suppress, the manipulations, the lies, the constant diminishment, rushed in at once. It wasn't just about being small in my family anymore. It was about protecting myself from a web of deceit that stretched farther than I had imagined. "What do you want me to do?" I asked, my heart racing. "Document everything. Protect yourself legally. And Trish, prepare for confrontation. It's coming, whether you like it or not. They won't stop unless you show them you've changed the rules of the game." The line went dead before I could ask another question, leaving me staring at the phone, mind spinning. I spent that night in restless thought. The apartment was quiet, the workshop table looming in the corner like a silent sentinel. I realized that leaving home hadn't been the end. It had been the beginning. The freedom I felt in Lisbon wasn't just physical, it was mental, emotional. But now I understood that real empowerment came with boundaries, with courage, with the willingness to face those who had hurt you and say no more. The next morning, I returned to the workshop. I touched the surface of the table I had been building, running my hands over the smooth wood and the hidden drawer I had installed weeks before. That drawer suddenly felt symbolic, a protective shield for my memories, my truth, my story. I began thinking about how I would confront my family, not in anger, not in tears, but in strength and clarity. I wasn't going to let them gaslight me anymore. I started small, contacting friends I trusted back home, people who had witnessed the subtle cruelty of my family over the years. Each conversation was a revelation. Stories I had doubted, experiences I had minimized for the sake of peace were confirmed. I wasn't imagining the manipulations. They were real. And the people who cared could validate my experiences. With each phone call, my confidence grew. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't invisible. I was reclaiming my story. Then came the shocking part. A letter from my mother, delivered by international mail, thick with words I had been dreading to read. She tried to sound conciliatory, apologetic even. Trish, we miss you terribly. We made mistakes. Megan, she's young. She doesn't always understand how to communicate love. But we need you back. Please don't let pride come between us. The words seemed almost believable, almost soft enough to soothe the wounds I had carried for decades. But I knew better. I had seen the messages. I had heard the manipulations. This was another attempt to lure me back into the familiar orbit of control. I stared at the letter for hours. Then I did something I hadn't done in my entire life. I tore it up, not in anger, not in spite, but as a ritual, a way to declare that my life, my decisions, and my worth were mine. The pieces fluttered to the floor like a confession I would no longer accept. For the first time, I truly felt free. Empowered by that clarity, I turned back to the table in the workshop. It was finished now, sturdy and elegant, its hidden drawer a secret sanctuary. I placed my hands on the polished wood and felt something deeper than satisfaction. I felt survival, triumph, and most importantly, reclamation. This table, built with my own hands, was the embodiment of my boundaries, my self-respect, my life lived on my terms. But freedom is never without risk, and as I began to step into the life I had imagined, freelance art, new friendships, quiet walks through Lisbon streets, I realized the past wasn't entirely behind me. Megan and my mother had tried to manipulate me for years. There was no reason to believe they wouldn't continue. And that's when the final confrontation arrived. Not physically, but emotionally, in the form of a video call from Megan herself. "Trish," she said, her face appearing on the screen, eyes narrowed but her voice calm. "You've changed. I can see it. Lisbon, the table, the distance, it suits you. But don't think this ends here. Our family is complicated, and you're part of it whether you like it or not. You can't just erase us." I felt the old tension creep in, the familiar fear of being small, being insignificant, being erased. But I met her gaze squarely and said, "I'm not erasing anyone, Megan. I'm simply choosing to exist without being diminished. I'm part of this family, yes, but I am also part of me. And if anyone tries to control or manipulate me again, I have the power, the boundaries, and the courage to stand firm. That's the truth you need to accept." Her eyes widened slightly, perhaps with surprise or anger, I couldn't tell which, and the line went dead. For the first time, I realized something important. The confrontation, the truth, the boundary setting wasn't about making them understand. It was about me understanding my worth. It was about reclaiming my space in a world that had always tried to tell me I didn't deserve it. In the weeks that followed, life in Lisbon transformed. I met people who encouraged me, friends who became chosen family, and clients who recognized my work and skill. I began teaching woodworking classes at the workshop, showing others how to create, build, and reclaim spaces of their own. Every time I taught a student to fit a joint perfectly or to varnish wood without streaks, I felt a piece of my own confidence solidify. And slowly, something miraculous happened inside me. I realized that being Trish Cooper, fully seen, fully heard, fully alive, didn't require anyone else's approval. It didn't require my family's laughter, Megan's smirks, or even my mother's reluctant acknowledgement. I existed, and that was enough. The table that I had built became more than furniture. It became a symbol, a talisman of my autonomy and resilience. Months later, sitting at that same table, sipping coffee as the morning sun hit the cobblestones outside, I reflected on everything I had gone through. Betrayal, manipulation, neglect. They had all shaped me, but they had not defined me. I had learned the hard truth. Family doesn't always see you the way you need to be seen. Sometimes you have to stand alone to understand your own value. Sometimes you have to leave everything behind to find the life you were meant to live. I smiled to myself, feeling a profound sense of peace. My life was messy, unpredictable, and sometimes lonely, but it was mine. And in that realization, I felt joy, real, unshakable joy. If there's one thing I want anyone listening to understand, it's this. You don't have to stay in spaces where you're made to feel small. You don't have to tolerate manipulation, even from the people who share your blood. You deserve to exist fully, to take up space, to build a life that honors you. That is not selfishness. That is survival. That is empowerment. As I ran my hands over the polished surface of the table one last time, I whispered to myself, I am seen. I am enough. I am mine. And in that whisper, I felt the weight of years lift from my shoulders. So I leave you with this question. Have you ever been made to feel like you didn't matter by the people who should have cherished you? And if so, what did you do to reclaim your space? Share your story in the comments because your voice matters. You deserve to take up space. You deserve to be heard.